It has been said that anyone can love a mountain. It's easy to love the mountains, but it takes soul to love a prairie. You have to be hardy and strong and tough and resilient, and the people who live here are a resilient, hardy people.
When we have really good quality habitat, it provides benefits to all of us. You know, a lot of people that are nature lovers, they want to see these kind of places conserved because they want to be able to enjoy them, and they want their kids or their kids' kids to be able to enjoy these places. And that's one of the reasons that I got into conservation is I just love these kind of unique or special places and the wildlife that's found there. And I really do want my kids to be able to see these places when they're older.
Well, I think it's very important. It's not a park, though. It's not where you go and you get people camping out and setting fires and all that sort of thing. I'm one that likes nature in its original state. I don't want it to be developed. I don't want it to become a dude ranch or something like that. I just like nature there, and people who like wilderness areas, I'm not talking about a wilderness, that's a wilderness area, who like that sort of thing, to preserve it in that state.
You can get out to the middle of the preserve and you don't see power lines, you don't see a lot of development, there's not a lot of human impact there, and even though bison and elk have been extirpated, you can still imagine a landscape as it was before 1825.
Just a short car ride south of Ada lies a pristine parcel of land known as the Pontotoc Ridge Preserve. The Nature Conservancy owns the property thanks to a generous gift in 1994 by the late Buddy Smith, an oil man and rancher who cared a great deal about the environment.
I got a call from the director in Tulsa. I was a member. He knew Buddy Smith and called me and said he was coming down to meet Buddy Smith and asked me to meet with him. So we met. Buddy and I became great friends after that. And I volunteered quite a bit. I had a plane and would fly them around, and they would look at land to see where they would want. And they flew over the Pontotoc Ridge Preserve to see if they would want that land. Buddy knew that he was dying of polio. It was coming back on him, and he wanted to do something. He agreed with the philosophy of the Conservancy that they wanted to preserve large tracts of land. They saw urban sprawl going through the country and land being eaten up by little acreages, and there weren't any big tracts left hardly. And we had the tall grass prairie, and so he wanted to give his ranch south of Fittstown to the Conservancy. I knew where he was coming from on that. I agreed with his thinking. So that's what happened.
Mr. Smith loved this area, he loved this property, and he wanted to see it endure much as it had since before European settlement. And so it's an assemblage of a lot of different habitat types, everything from bottomland hardwood forest to caves and sinkholes, tall grass prairie and mixed grass prairie. There's a lot of springs and headwater seeps. So it's just this big mix of all of the habitats that occur in central Oklahoma and the Arbuckle-Simpson aquifer that make it special.
The 2,906-acre Pontotoc Ridge Preserve is located along the boundary of Pontotoc and Johnston counties, with about two-thirds of the acreage inside Pontotoc County. It is located in the Cross Timbers region, a strip of land in the south-central section of the United States that runs from southeastern Kansas to central Texas.
The Cross Timbers ecoregion is just a broad way of describing an ecological area, a mix of a lot of different habitats. And the Cross Timbers goes through the middle of Oklahoma down into Texas, and Cross Timbers habitat is characterized by post oaks and blackjack oaks. But the cross timbers ecoregion is where the Great Plains meets the South and the Red River, and there's just all these different habitats that come together. So that's why you have a mix of prairie and forest and savanna, because of where we are geographically.
The thing about Pontotoc Ridge is its biodiversity. There's something about the limestone area that is conducive to plant growth, and we have a large variety of plants down there. The Conservancy wants to preserve biodiversity, and that's a very good place to do it.
Pontotoc Ridge is nestled in the foothills northeast of the Arbuckle Mountains, one of the oldest mountain ranges in the country that millions of years ago was taller than the Rockies are today. The preserve is also located above the Arbuckle-Simpson aquifer, which provides many people in southern Oklahoma with a pristinely potable water supply. It's another strong argument for conservation.
All the water that's in the Arbuckle-Simpson aquifer, filters through the surface, through that habitat. The better habitat you have, the better water quality you're going to have entering your aquifer, and the city of Ada depends solely on that water for their drinking water and for their industry. And so when we have good quality habitat, we're taking care of our landscape, we're taking care of our water supply, and that's really important. And I think that's one of those really direct links that people can see and understand is their water. We all need water. Maybe people don't understand or appreciate a prairie, but they can appreciate the need for clean water because it affects every single one of us every day.
A lot of the landscape that you see is this faulted and folded limestone outcrop that is so iconic for the Arbuckle-Simpson aquifer. And there are a lot of these different habitat types you can see when you cross the preserve on foot. You'll first notice that there are springs and seeps. There are caves. We have 4 caves that we know of, and I don't doubt that there are more. A number of faults come together on the property, and that's why we have the sinkholes and the caves here. But it's really hard when you're here not to realize and think about you're on top of the Arbuckle-Simpson aquifer. And it's such an important aquifer for the city of Ada, for the people of this area, and we're in the recharge zone. So all of the rainfall that falls on Pontotoc Ridge, eventually a portion of that will infiltrate and recharge that aquifer.
Visiting the preserve is a lot like stepping back in time. Walking through it reveals bottomland forests, oak savannas, mixed grass and tall grass prairies, dramatic rock outcrops and valleys, and a staggering variety of living colors. There are no permanent roads, no oil and gas activity. Really not much evidence of a human presence at all. It's a rugged, wild landscape that is a feast for the senses as well as the spirit.
There are things here that are here and you might not notice. We have red-spotted toad. This is the most easternmost location that they're known from. And the red-spotted toad loves the seeps and springs over on the rock outcrop areas, and it's actually an S1 species, a Tier 1 species of conservation concern in Oklahoma. So that's kind of unusual, and there are people that just come to look at things like frogs and lizards and snakes, and I think we have 54 reptile and amphibian species. We have, we're very proud of our rattlesnakes. We have the western diamondback, timber rattlesnake, and the pygmy rattlesnake, and it's always a treat when you get to see those.
Really? I wondered about that. I've walked through the preserve with experts in different kinds of field, and it's kind of unusual. If you walk through it with a botanist, all they see is the plants. They don't see anything else. I've walked through it with a geologist, all they see is the rocks. And you walk through it with a butterfly person, that's all they see. And the bird people, all they do is listen to the birds. So each expert has their own field that they're interested in.
We've documented around 194 different bird species here. We have a winter bird count every year in January, the last Saturday in January, and that's a big event for us. And it's a lot of fun. If you've never participated in one and you're interested in birding, that's a good place to start out. So we're always looking for unusual birds and new birds, and the butterfly counts have been going on now for more than 15 years, I think. We have over 100 species of butterflies that have been documented here.
Yeah, hoary edge.
And a silver spotted bow?
No, just a hoary edge.
Okay. Butterflies are like a canary in a coal mine. They're a good indicator of the quality of an ecosystem. So it's important to have a count every year that they can develop the history on. And
Got it.
No, oh, there he is.
I do that, and if there's other groups that come down and lead nature walks, I've taken down cross fence, cut cedar trees, and mowed trails, whatever needs to be done.
We have around 60 species of dragonflies have been documented, and there are people that are starting to look at the beetles and grasshoppers, and so people like to make lists, and they like to find new things. I don't know, it's just something innate in us. All of that information is acquired and cataloged by people coming to the preserve. We have a lot of volunteers that come and spend their free time working on research projects or helping other people with their research projects. And then we have a lot of university students, both undergraduate and graduate students, that do research on the preserve and off the preserve on private land around here. We've really kind neighbors that are curious, just like we are.
Although there is a lot of activity at the Pontotoc Ridge Preserve, it is controlled. The preserve is not open to the general public, and in that respect differs from municipal, state, and national parks. The Nature Conservancy, as the owner of the preserve, makes efforts to accommodate people who want to visit in the form of guided tours. But it is a conservation site and remains sheltered from heavy and arbitrary human traffic.
We do have school groups that come out and visit. We have a certain number of volunteer work days and field trips and hikes and things for the public. But it's not open to the public like a park would be or a refuge would be. And that's to protect people as well as it is to protect the animals and the plants that are out here.
We're trying to preserve nature in its original state, so it's controlled quite a bit more than what most people are used to in a park. But it's important we do that, otherwise you're going to have urban sprawl and parking lots and roads everywhere, and we need to preserve large tracts of land for posterity, I think.
You know, all of our places for the most part are open at some point for public visitation, whether it's through one of our spring or fall sets of field trips. People can come out and enjoy these places in the company of one of our experts that can tell them all about these places. They're not open like a public park. We just don't have the resources to manage a lot of people that would come to these places and enjoy them. And so we have limited access. Some places do have public trails where people can walk in, you know, park their car, walk in and enjoy the trail. But the reality is, you know, we're a fairly small organization here in Oklahoma. We get a lot of conservation done, and we want to focus on conservation, not so much managing people. And that's why we try and have those pretty specific events that people can come and enjoy these places.
When Buddy Smith offered his land to the Nature Conservancy, it was gratefully accepted, not only because of the generosity attached to it, but also because it fit a need the Conservancy had at the time for that particular ecosystem. Not all properties are accepted.
The Nature Conservancy has a sophisticated planning process called ecoregional planning that we've done around the world, and we work with partners to identify basically the best of the best that's still out there. Once we do that, we put that onto a map, and that guides where we do things and where we don't. As you can imagine, we get calls all the time from people that want to sell us their land or give us their land, and we can't often buy or accept donations for all of it, unless it's in one of those priority areas that we call our ecoregional priority areas. The Pontotoc Ridge Preserve is within one of those priority areas within the Cross Timbers ecoregion. I think the Nature Conservancy is the largest conservation organization in the world, based on a few different definitions, funds raised, the amount of land owned, that kind of thing. And so one of the things that I think is a really important part of the Nature Conservancy niche in conservation is that we oftentimes own property within these priority areas, and those lands are important because they allow us to test concepts, do things to conserve the habitat here, and then we can use that to export that beyond our boundaries. We own a lot of land in Oklahoma. We own about 85,000 acres, but that's just a postage stamp in the whole grand scheme of things. You look at prairies, for instance, there's something like less than 10% of our prairies left in this country right now. And in order for us to do a good job of conserving what's left, we need to work with private landowners that have a conservation ethic as well. So if we can do things on our property that's going to benefit them conservation-wise or business-wise, say for their ranch, then those are the things that hopefully they will accept and start to implement on their property. And then what we've got is a long-term solution that goes well beyond our boundaries.
The Pontotoc Ridge Preserve may seem vast when crossing it on foot, but it's really a relatively small parcel of land, especially when compared with some of the private cattle ranches in the region. Because the preserve is situated in such an ecologically important and biologically diverse area, one goal is to acquire adjoining acres and expand the protected area.
Conservation by design is our planning framework that we use to identify where we're going to work, what are the conservation concerns there, what are the solutions or strategies that we're going to use to combat those conservation threats or concerns. And we also put into that monitoring. We want to make sure that what we are trying to do is actually happening when we put fire on the ground or we acquire a conservation easement. We want to make sure that we're testing our solutions to make sure that, one, they're working, and two, see if there's a way we can improve that. It's a long-term feedback loop that we use at all of our places.
It's an area of the county and this part of the state where there are large ranches now. There's not too many places where you have these large tracts of land that are undeveloped. And in fact, from the ridge, you can go down toward Bromide and Clarita and really not hit, I think there's maybe one dirt road in there. So it's pretty wild, still undeveloped wilderness area that if you had the money, you could maybe buy some of that and expand it.
Everything in the southern Great Plains developed under the influence of climate, fire, predation, and herbivory. And so the Nature Conservancy works very hard to try to keep those processes like predation, herbivory, grazing, and fire in the landscape, part of the landscape. And it's part of our management strategy to use prescribed burning to mimic the once widespread wildfires, in order to keep the habitat looking the same.
When Buddy first gave the preserve to the Conservancy, before he gave it, he had bought the ranch, it was overgrazed, took the cattle off, it grew up with weeds, and he knew it needed to be burned. So he went around to the neighbor and said, I'm thinking about having a fire. And they said, let her go, we need a fire, there's too many red cedars around here. So he had it all done right. He had the Fittstown Fire Department there, and after about 2 hours, they had burned about 10 acres. And Buddy's not a patient man, so he got his helper to set the fire without them seeing it. And there it went, and it was a big one too. And it burned, those cedars just exploded. It burned about the west half of the place and burned over to the north and went out that night. And there was an old Indian man Buddy knew pretty well over there that told him Buddy told him he was going to burn it. The Indian man said it again the next day when the wind got out of the north, and it came back and burned the east half of the place the next day. So we've never had a fire like that, and it did a lot of good too. It was black, for a long time, and then the green grass came out, and it was beautiful.
we're missing a really important component, and that's the grazing. We no longer have these large migratory herds of bison coming through, and we don't have cattle on the preserve at this time, so we're missing that tool. And looking forward over the next 20 years, I would love to see the Nature Conservancy acquire additional lands. If we had something like 10 or 11, 12,000 acres, it would be possible for us to introduce a bison herd, reintroduce elk, which were once the most widespread mammal in North America, and we could do that on a scale that would be possible to achieve some success with. So I'd like to see that happen. Going forward, I hope that we're able to continue to use fire as a tool, and that we can increase our opportunity to use grazing as a tool, and keep managing the landscape so that it looks like it did.
Whether you're a strict preservationist or you're a hunter fisherman, it's all about habitat, and that's what we do here, is conserve and restore habitat that we can export to, hopefully, our neighbors around us.
Whatever the future holds, the Pontotoc Ridge Preserve in its present state is an oasis of robust natural splendor in a world crisscrossed with highways and utility poles. There is no air or noise pollution. There are no billboards, no businesses, no traffic jams. At the preserve, the plants and animals peacefully preside over the terrain, while humans are prudent and fortunate observers.
You can come out here and on your own or with a group and experience really what the world was like 150 years ago or more, and experience it in your own terms.
Well, when I retired, I wanted something to do, someplace to go, and it's a perfect place for me because I like a wilderness area, and I can hike through that place and be outdoors and be miles away from any human being. I love it that way. It's neat.
And that's what the preserve is here to protect, is all of this habitat. And the Nature Conservancy is good at that. That's what we do. We own preserves, and we like to say that parks are for people and preserves are for habitat. So that's what we do. We're here to protect the habitat as it was and going forward as it will be. It's a thing of beauty and curiosity. It's of interest to scientists, but also to just ordinary people that have an appreciation for real natural beauty.
View this program again anytime at www.youtube.com/cityofadaok.